Hi class, this is Bill Berry returning with another video series on JavaScript. We last week in the first lessons covered some very fundamental stuff so that you'd understand what the language is, what type of language it is. We also looked at some writing of basic scripts, so we learned a little bit about HTML, so we're kind of ready to move forward. We have a couple other things to learn that are very helpful pieces, so we're going to start with a little background on a tool that will help you find your errors, which is a very useful thing. The default in JavaScript is you tend to just see nothing. You don't get any information if you just look at the web page, and you might not know what's going wrong with your script. So we're going to learn a tool that will help with that. So we're going to start with that, and then we're going to move forward with some other fun stuff, and that would be actually starting to write more interesting JavaScript code. So first things first, let us take a quick look here, and that's going to be, what do we know? What is it that we know at this very point? We know basic HTML tags. We know how to write simple scripts. We know how to write data to a web page using document.write. We also know a way to gather some information from the user using the prompt function. We looked a little bit at numeric strings and literals and operators and things like that. So we sort of have the basic ideas of some things, but we haven't really used them to make interesting scripts. So of course, that's what's coming soon. So as I mentioned, we're going to start with Developer Console, and then we'll look also at what the typical workflows are. So how do you make your life easy when you're writing these scripts? Because you don't just write the code and run it and you're done. Usually you have a process. So how does that work? And we're also going to look at a couple of algorithm design tools while we're there so that we understand what they mean when we see them. We'll also start talking about variables. That's kind of a critical thing in a programming language, to be able to store data so that we can use it. Right now we've just had to consume everything right where we got it. So we need a way to hang on to some variables, to some information, so that we can use it a little bit later in the script. So that's important. We're also going to look briefly at internal documentation. What does it mean to write readable code, and what are some ways to do that? We're also going to look later at how to do pop-ups. So how do you make a little message that pops up and alerts the user to something? That's easy to do here. And we're going to look at forms. So forms will give us a way to really start using JavaScript to its full advantage, so that we can create some forms for the user to enter data, and then we can interact with those forms with JavaScript, which again really shows its power and kind of opens the door to some possibilities. So let's get started with the Developer Console, which is, as I said, an important tool. So we're going to look at that and learn a little bit more about errors and how to find them. So the first thing is, the Developer Console is not made for normal humans working with web browsers. If you accidentally hit the key, like I do sometimes, I don't know why I go to hit that key, but sometimes I hit this key and this funny window pops up, and most humans do not ever want to see this, and it's an accident should it ever appear. But not us. We're going to see that we do create errors when we write code. It's inevitable. So we'd kind of like to know a little bit more information. Sometimes we can decide based on the information that we see on the screen what's going on and where the error might occur, but very often not so much. So when we just get nothing, sometimes it's useful to get a little more information. We need to understand the Developer Console to do that. There are menu commands, sometimes toolbar commands that you can use. I press F12, which seems to work in most browsers, and that's a pretty easy way to toggle that on, and I think it toggles it off in most browsers too. If you press it once, it'll come up. You press it again, it'll go off. Then let's actually create some errors so that we can see what's going on with that. And then we're going to also use the Developer Console. Sometimes we don't want output to go to the web page, but we just want to see it for our own purposes, and so we can write it to the Developer Console, which can be very useful as well. So let us take a peek at that. So let's first start with a command, or some script code that really kind of looks familiar-ish. So let us go over. I'm going to jump over. Remember, we have our little starter file. You can always copy that. So my recommendation is, when you're going to make a new script, you just do a right-click copy, and then you do a right-click paste. I usually do it with keystrokes, and then you name it what you're going to work on next. So I'm going to call it console.html. Then you can right-click it and open it with Notepad, or just drag and drop it to Notepad, and then we're going to see that comes up, and here we have our code. Now inside here, I'm just going to paste this code. I'm going to go grab it from the slide. In fact, let's see, where did I thought I had it? So I'm going to grab it from this slide real quick, and I will be right back. Alright, so here's the code of interest here. We're just going to paste it right here at this point, and then here is a nice little trick, by the way. If I highlight several lines, I can hit the tab key and move them all over at the same time. I don't have to do it line by line. That's kind of nice. Okay, so we have some code here. You might want to pause and copy this code if you don't, so that you can have it and work along with me. So if so, pause now, copy this code, and make sure it works. Now what I'm going to do is I will go ahead and hit Run Launch in Firefox so that I can see it work. Don't forget to save it first. You can click the button. I hit Control S kind of compulsively usually to make sure that I save my work quite often. Here we go. So I've got that here. I'm going to save my work. I'm going to run Launch in Firefox. Okay, so Firefox comes up, and of course we get some code out. Now don't worry about the fact that, or we get some data out. Notice that you have this long set of zeros and a 2 at the end of how much money is owed. Don't worry about that. Just, don't be concerned with it. Okay, so I have that here, and so we know that this is a quick calculation. You might recognize this from a challenge from last time if you're in class with me, and you'll notice that everything matches up. And of course, we notice we have very nicely matched up parentheses. Remember, you can click on them, and if you click on the beginning or end, it will match up and show you in highlighted text and a different color text which parentheses goes with what open parentheses and close. So we have everything right and the thing works. But let's make an intentional error and see what happens. So I'm going to intentionally come back here and I'm going to delete this close parentheses. Alright, so I'm going to save it. Now we don't know exactly what's going to happen, so it'll be interesting to find out. Now remember, you don't have to restart, you don't have to run every time from inside your notepad. You can just come back to the window that already has this running, and if you have saved this thing, which I have, then I can just press F5 or refresh or however you want to do it. I'm going to press F5 and notice now we get a whole bunch of nothing. So this is the default, unfortunately, when you work with JavaScript, is if there's something that goes wrong, you just get silence because it's not going to write something to the web page, right? That's not really what a normal user would want to see, is errors popping up on their web page. So there is error information available, but not unless we ask for it. So the magic thing here is I'm going to press F12, or certainly you can come here and find, if you want to dive into this, click here, web developer, click here, and then you can find, right, these things are all here, the developer toolbar. So you can find it through the browser console or whatever. I'm just going to press F12 because I think it's easier. Right, now notice that you have a divider here between the web page and the console. There's some other tools. We won't use any of these except the console typically. But you'll notice here that it says, right here, without even rerunning, syntax error, missing parentheses after argument list, and then it's got a link that you'll probably not find very useful, but at least it's there. Now, it will also always give you a line number. So it says this is in the console HTML file, and it found it at line 9, column 12. Well, let's go see what line 9, column 12 means. Well, this is line 9. Unfortunately, the 12 doesn't make much sense because it's going to assume you're starting at the beginning. So if I move this all the way over here, then at some point around here, it's going to say, let's see, what does it do? 1, 2, 3. It counts these probably as tabs. Anyway, what it's saying is when it got to line 9, it realized that something was wrong. Now, on our particular case, the error was not on line 9, it was on line 8. But if you think about it, this is a free-form language, so you can continue typing on the next line. There's no reason I had to put the closed parentheses here. I could have put it here. It makes no sense. Don't do that, but it is a free-form language. So it really didn't know that there was a problem until it got down here and you started to do something else, right? Here it is, in fact, column 13. That's pretty close. When you started to do something else, it said, wait a minute, you forgot a parentheses from before. So this is one important lesson, and that is that very often the error is not found until the next line somewhere, right? So that's a clue. If it says there's an error on this line, especially toward the beginning of the line, that's a good clue that maybe you want to come over here to the previous line and see if there's something missing there, right? So that's one important thing. Now, another important thing that we want to talk about, let me see if I've got it in a slide. right? So this tells us that the error is there, right? So another important thing to talk about is that, you know, as I mentioned here, that sometimes it's not divulged until the next line, is not discovered until the next line. Now, the other thing to note is JavaScript has an optional way to end commands, to end lines, and that is that you can put a semicolon at the end of every line. You don't have to do all of them, you can do some of them, it works just fine too. That's optional. Why might we want to do that? Well, number one, Java itself uses semicolons, as does C. So when you get to the end of a statement and you think you've completed your whole thought, you put a semicolon, right? Not at the end of each physical line, but the end of each statement. Right, so in this case, I could put a semicolon at the end of each line. Well, what does that say? That tells JavaScript that, hey, I am done with this statement. I believe that I am complete with this thought. So guess what's going to happen now if I take out this and I save it, and now I go back and I refresh it in my browser, what's going to happen? Press F5. Now, notice we still get the missing close parenthesis, but notice where it's reported. Console.html line 8 column 63. So now if we go over here, look at that. Now of course, you know, you're going to be off by a little because of the tabbing sometimes, but in this case it's pretty darn close. It's saying, hey, you're missing a semicolon or a close parenthesis over here. So that was pretty darn close. So there is a definite advantage to using those semicolons. I may use them or may not depending on the situation here, but it's not a bad idea so that when you move to other languages like Java, you will automatically have that concept. So that is a good recommendation. So that tells us we can get a little more information with the console, and notice now when I run it, everything's cool. I can get rid of the console by pressing F12. I highly recommend that when you are running your JavaScript, whether everything is sunny and happy and working or not, you put on that developer console because you will get some extra information, right? So here's the summary. If you use the semicolon, as we saw here, you will see that it will report the error a little bit more accurately in terms of the end of this correct line rather than the beginning of the next. So, in summary, use the console, press F12 if you ever are stumped about what's going on, and maybe if you're not even stumped, always turn on that developer console because you're going to find that it is super useful to know more information rather than less. In class, if you're working with me in class and we're working through exercises and you say, I don't know why my thing's not working, and I see that you're not turning on the developer console to get more information, you haven't really done everything you need to get to find your own errors. So this is an important step. All right, so we're going to continue in the next video with a little bit of information about how we start getting our ideas together. How do we take a little problem that's given to us and actually formulate a plan? So we're going to look at algorithm design tools and the typical JavaScript workflow. We've talked about the workflow, but we'll review it real quick in the context of these design tools. But I'm going to stop the video now because I don't want these to get too long. So stay tuned for the next lesson, and we'll see you in class, of course, if you're with me there. If not, you can always email, post some comments, or if you're in class, you can post on discussion forum if you have further questions. See you in the next video.